I want to share with you footage that just took place in the UK Parliament, where a member of the Labour Party asked a question about the, quote, fascist Israeli government.
Since the election of the fascist Israeli government in December last year, there has been an increase in human rights violations against Palestinian civilians, including children. So can the Prime Minister tell us how he is challenging what Amnesty and other human rights organisations are referring to an apartheid state?
So this story actually developed a little bit, and I want to share with you what happened. But just to give you my initial reaction to this Labour MP, Kim Johnson's remarks, the first question I'd just like to know is, I wonder, are there other countries that she refers to as fascist? Maybe some other countries in the Middle East? What about China, Russia? But you're singling out Israel as a fascist country. Secondly, we all know why Israel was created, or at least what was the catalyst for Israel's creation. Israel was established in the aftermath of the Jewish people being victims of fascism. And as the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which has been internationally accepted around the world, describes as a form of anti-Semitism, it's when you describe Israel as being like Nazis. And it's such a cruel thing to turn the victim of abuse and claim that they are the abuser. It's a demonization, it's a singling out. It's the vitriol that's used to describe Israel that makes this wrong and offensive. And look, Israel is not a perfect country. It's just like every other country. It's comprised of human beings. They may do things that you agree with and you disagree with, but they are dealing with a complicated situation. They've been trying since their inception, nearly 3/4 of a century ago, to make peace with the Palestinian Arabs. And they are in a tricky situation, dealing with another side which doesn't, their leaders at least, have not wanted to make peace. And so it's messy and it's nuanced and it's complicated. And when you start banding around these words like fascist, which have no grounding in reality, and has no acknowledgement to Israel's desire for peace, and you may not like some of the politicians that the Israeli government or parliament is made up of, but banding around the words like fascist, and again, as I say, given the context of Israel's creation and given the way that Israel has behaved, is completely inappropriate and lends itself to a singling out and a demonization of Israel, which leads to anti-Semitism. What makes this even more disturbing and upsetting is that Kim Johnson, this Labour MP, she took over this seat from her constituency seat from Louise Ellman, who was a massive campaigner against anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And here we have someone who seems to be engaging in a lot of the anti-Semitic tropes of the far left. Now, what makes this story interesting is that a few hours later, she clearly had received a message or had a meeting with senior people within the Labour Party and was told that she had to apologise for her remarks. So let's have a look at what happened just after she made those initial comments. She came back to Parliament and made another speech.
Point of order, Kim Johnson.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I would like to apologise unreservedly for the intemperate language that I used during PMQs. I was wrong to use the term fascist in relation to the Israeli government and understand why this was particularly insensitive given the history of the State of Israel. And while there are far-right elements in the government, I recognise that the use of the term in this context was wrong. I would also like to apologise for the use of the term apartheid state. While I was quoting accurately Amnesty's description, I recognise this is insensitive and I'd like to withdraw it.
Well, I'm sure she meant every word of that. But the point I really want to get at here is the following, is how should myself as a British Jew and the British Jewish community and the Jewish community at large and beyond, how should we feel about what took place here? Because on the one hand, I'm not so sure, in fact I'm certain that this would not have happened if the previous Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, was still the leader. I don't think she would have been summoned to the leader's office and been told to withdraw her remarks. By the way, Amnesty International themselves have a lot to answer for when it comes to singling out and demonising Israel. And again, use of the term apartheid, where this is just ignoring all the complexities and nuances involved in the conflict and Israel's desire to try and find some kind of resolution whilst also maintaining their security. It just ignores all of that, but let's put that to one side. So on the one hand, the fact that this has happened, that the leadership of the Labour Party have called her in and told her that your words are unacceptable and they're insensitive and they're inappropriate, that is something that just would not have happened just a few years earlier. But on the other hand, I've spoken to people about this, and they've felt, why should we be happy or grateful that someone has withdrawn offensive remarks about the world's only Jewish state, which often lends itself to anti-Semitism, that kind of language? Why should we be grateful that she's withdrawn something that was wrong to begin with? And more than that, it should have already been clear to her that such language shouldn't be tolerated, or wouldn't be tolerated in the Labour Party. So I certainly hear both sides. Where do I sit in all this? Well, there's a part of me which views this through a very cynical lens, because the current leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, just a few years ago was one of the most senior members of Jeremy Corbyn's cabinet and was campaigning to get him into number 10 to become the Prime Minister. And so, unless he's had some massive conversion and seen the light, which I don't buy, there's some moral failing here on his part, that he was trying to get someone who was, in my opinion, and I'd be happy to stand up in a court of law and argue this case, Jeremy Corbyn, I believe, was an anti-Semite, or at least the words he said and the actions that he participated in were anti-Semitic. So he was trying to get someone like this into power in the UK. And furthermore, he was saying that it's wrong to describe Israel as having a fascist government. But in 2015, Keir Starmer attended an event of the Palestine Solidarity campaign in Camden in London, and he was standing up behind a banner which said, "Kick Israeli fascism out of FIFA." He was going to an event that was calling for the boycott of Israel and was standing alongside panelists that were using such language and talking about Israeli racism and fascism. So he responded by saying that he didn't support the call to boycott Israel, but he was there at an event speaking on a panel with banners and speakers that were talking about Israeli fascism and racism and calling for boycott of Israel. So can this man be trusted on issues of anti-Semitism? A huge part of me is cynical and sees what he's doing as just a cynical, pragmatic tool and act in order to make Labour more electable. But on the other hand, he still did it. He told this Labour MP that she should make a retraction and an apology, and she did. And this wouldn't have happened a few years ago. Now, this could have been down to pure pragmatism and cynicism on his part, because he wants to make the Labour Party electable and mainstream, especially given his past. It's also possible that he's become more aware of the issues, but this is someone it wasn't like he was a high school student when he was sharing these panels or trying to get campaigning for Jeremy Corbyn. But I think the key takeaway after thinking about this for a while is this. Whether or not what he's doing, Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, is purely just pragmatic and cynical on his part, the fact of the matter is that he has deemed it necessary for the Labour Party to be stronger, much stronger, at calling out anti-Semitism and singling out of Israel and the demonization of Israel. And why is he doing that? Because he's deemed it as politically unacceptable, really, to be engaging in that kind of politics. And so my gratitude here primarily actually is for the British people, because one of the things that Labour Party activists found when doing their assessment of why people didn't vote for Labour in the 2019 British general election is that anti-Semitism kept on coming up on the doorsteps as being something that really bothered a lot of Labour voters. They just didn't think it's acceptable. So for me, actually, regardless of what's motivating all the various players here, the fact is that in Britain in 2023, it has been clear to mainstream politicians that if they want to be elected, they need to be standing up against anti-Jewish sentiment. There's lots of other countries out there in the world where it's much more difficult to be a Jew. To be a Jew in the United Kingdom, there may be challenges, but it is very much a blessing and a privilege. I'm Ollie Annisfeld, and you're watching JTV.